Hey guys, Hookside Ontario here, and today I'm going to give you my top 10 tips that I would give to people who are beginners or new to fishing. But these tips can be used for people who are a little more advanced and might help you out there as well. So this is my first video for my fishing channel, and if you guys are interested in the future, I'll be doing some fishing vlogs, trying to catch some trout, bass, salmon, and many other types of fish. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned to the channel. And if you would like any other specific tips on fishing that aren't covered in the video, leave a comment down below. So let's get right into it. So the first tip I'm going to give you guys is to download a fish identification app or a fish chart and rules and regulations regarding your area onto your phone before you go fishing. So for instance, for me, I have a fish chart here downloaded onto my phone, and then also all the rules and regulations for my area. That's just so if you're a beginner fisherman, you're going to have trouble identifying fish, and that's going to help you. And if you catch something that you don't regularly catch, you're probably not going to have, if you're allowed to keep that fish memorized since you don't usually catch it. And that's just really helpful. For instance, I don't really catch salmon where I fish, but if I were to catch a nice salmon that I might want to take home to eat, then I would consult all those rules in my phone just to make sure I'm staying within the laws and guidelines for my area, making sure I don't get in trouble, as well as I'm very conscious of the environment because they have that stuff in place for a reason. And just having those two things on your phone ahead of time is going to make your fishing trip a lot easier and within the laws, hopefully. The second tip I would give you guys is to really be careful of different scented stuff that you can apply to your baits, and be really careful when you're using that in your tackle box. So I bought this cross spray from Berkley to spray on like the plastic craws that I bought to make it seem more realistic, and that stuff's very helpful for you in the future, but you need to be careful because what ended up happening was somehow the spray bottle ended up leaking, and it leaked onto all my lures into my tackle box. It made it smell really bad. I had to throw some stuff out, and if you don't wash the hooks after you get that stuff on it, it somehow makes it rust way faster. So just be careful of that. So if you want to use spray or different scented products to apply to your baits, I suggest that you put it in a plastic bag or something, or even keep it separate from your tackle box, but just really be careful when you're using that and use that at your own discretion. The next tip that I experienced is choosing your tackle box wisely. So there's so many different types of tackle boxes out there. You can have the classic plastic one that has the different trays that kind of like extend out after you open up the top, or there's the ones that have a bunch of plastic like holders that all fit into a big kind of felt bag. And that's something that I bought in the past because I had quite a few lures. But the problem with that is I do a lot of creek fishing, and that thing gets really heavy when you're carrying it for a while. Like, it was about 25 pounds. So just use discretion when you're buying your tackle box. If you know you're only going to be fishing for a few fish, not a wide variety, you might want to get a smaller tackle box, or just buy a plastic tray rather than an entire tackle box. If you're on a boat, then it might be helpful to you to buy a large tackle box since you're not carrying it all the time. But if you're doing a lot of creek fishing, which involves a lot of moving around, then you're going to want something more mobile and light to carry. But something that you could do in the past, I personally didn't like to do it, is if you wanted to buy the felt bag with all the plastic trays inside of it, you could have each plastic tray have the baits for different types of fish, so you're only carrying one tray around you and the bag just holds all your stuff at home. But I like to personally carry most of my stuff with me, which is why I switched from the plastic felt bag, which weighed a lot, onto the classic plastic tackle box, which is more mobile and easy to carry. So my next tip is emphasizing the importance and usefulness of a swivel. So if you don't know what a swivel is, here is a swivel. And how it works is this end of the swivel is tied directly to your line, and then this top end right here clips on to your lure, just like So here's the swivel, and here is a spinnerbait I have. And then I clip, as you can see, this side, hold on, this side directly to the lure, and now it's secure. And this is really useful and helpful for switching out baits quickly rather than having to cut off the lure again or untie it or something and then having to retie on a lure, which can be very time consuming. Some lures this does not work well on. I don't really use plastic worms that often, but I noticed online that people say that you should tie the line directly onto a plastic worm rather than using a swivel, because sometimes swivels can prevent some action on certain lures. But for a lure like this, this spinnerbait, if I'm reeling in and there's a current or there's some sort of resistance, then the spinnerbait's going to be tight against the swivel like this, and it's basically as if I tied the line directly onto it. So a spinnerbait isn't going to make much of a difference in this case, but something like this jig, I've noticed. So if I tie this, if I were to tie this directly onto the, if I were to tie a line directly onto the jig, that would be totally fine, which is how it works for most lures actually. But now for this jig, if I were to use this swivel, it's not very mobile on the swivel. So even if there's resistance and current, when this, if I cast it out and the jig's like this to start off with, it might not move all the way back here, and it might not be tight against the line like this. So for this jig, you would definitely have to tie it directly onto the line, and the swivel wouldn't work. But for a lot of things, a swivel is very useful, and you can switch out lures quickly, and it's just very convenient. So my next tip is regarding some gear that you should buy for your tackle box before you decide to go out fishing. First one is line cutters, and the second is these jig eye buster. There's not really a specific name for it, but basically what these do is when you buy jigs, unless they're really expensive jigs, they're gonna come with, for example, this jig, I've poked out the eye right here, but the green paint usually covers this jig eye, so you're not able to get your line through here. As you can see, I already busted through it, but how it works is, for example, if paint was over the jig eye here, I would just put it into this machine, and there's a little clipper right here that just pokes through the jig eye. So if you bought jigs ahead of time and then you didn't have this jig eye buster and you decide to go out fishing, you're not going to be able to go out fishing because you're not able to get your line through the jig eye. So this is really important, and of course line cutters are very important if you're going out and you really get snagged on something and you need to cut the line. Then you're not just kind of standing there all day trying to find a way to break the line or snag off. But yeah, be sure to purchase these two things before you go out fishing, as it's going to make your life quite a bit easier in the future. So the next tip that I'm going to give you guys is that certain baits that work really well in, say, you're catching things in a lake, may not work well in other areas. So crankbaits are really good at catching fish in lakes, and they're a very popular thing, but they don't work well in the creek that I fish in. So a well-known bait or bait that works in one area may not work well in another area. So it's just experimenting with different baits. If you run into a local angler and chat with them, see what types of fish are around in the area, which is really helpful as well, but also see what fish are really biting on and what's popular for that specific area. Yeah, just like I stated, crankbaits don't work where I fish in at the creek. They're very good in the lake that the creek connects to, but for some reason they don't like crankbaits. So instead, soft baits are very effective, but you wouldn't really know that unless you try them before and switched up your bait. So the next tip is regarding casting and changing up things with your cast. So when you're casting in a certain area, it's very easy to get into a habit of casting in that same area over and over and over again, and you're not catching fish. I don't know, countless amount of times I've gotten to the habit and then I realized it. I cast 2 feet, 3 feet over from that regular casting area, and I managed to get a bite in the first couple of casts. So just changing up, even slight changes, not even big changes, of where you're casting, what depth you're casting, slow or fast retrieval can make a world of difference for the fish and how many fish you catch that day. So one very seemingly obvious and simple tip that I'm going to give you that I forgot in the past is that you can twist your pole from being one piece into 2 pieces. I know it seems very obvious, but a lot of people forget about it since they buy the pole all assembled together, and then they might have a truck and just keep it in one piece all the time and completely forget that you can twist it into 2 pieces. So this is really helpful for storage, or if you're using a car, it's kind of clunky to have sitting in between the seats, or just having it in the car rather than storing it in the trunk. So that's something that's really going to help you out in the future. So the next tip I'm going to give you guys is tension is so important to adjust before potentially getting a fish, or adjusting when you have a fish on the line. So in case you don't know what tension is, it's how easily line is able to be pulled out of your reel. There's a little knob on 90% of reels, unless you get a really cheap reel, that adjusts your tension. So to start off with your tension, I would say put it somewhere near the middle. And then if you run into some seaweed or something like that and you find it's pulling out a lot of line, then you're definitely going to want to increase it. But if you get against a really heavy snag and it's not pulling out any line, then you're going to want to decrease it. So just slight changes in tension, use your own discretion, but it's very important to adjust before you potentially run into a big or small fish, and how quickly you can bring the fish in. So the last and final tip I'm going to give you guys is to check the time of year before you go out fishing. So this is really helpful, obviously, because you'll be able to spend your time more efficiently rather than trying to fish for a certain type of fish that might not be there based on their movement patterns, spawning, what type of cold or warm water they like, and different things like that. Also, this is helpful for example, there's this one area I like to fish where there's a carp spawning season and they kind of drive out all the game fish from that area. So knowing that information ahead of time, I can avoid that area and move to a different area where I'm more likely to catch a game fish that I'm looking to catch. If you need any additional tips and techniques for fishing, I found a really helpful resource to be this book on freshwater fishing tips and techniques. He talks, Gene Kujak, the author, I hope I pronounced that right, he talks about different ways to cook fish, how to locate fish, knots, and different things like that that are going to help you on your fishing journey if you need any additional help. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to comment, like, and or subscribe. And if there's anything you would like to see in future videos, future vlogs, feel free to comment that down below as well, and I will catch you in the next one.